Okay, so we've already kind of gotten started here, but we wanted to hit record before we, went any further. So for those of you who don't know, I'm having a bit of a chat with Dayna today. Dayna really, really stuck out to me recently because she's really been on this path that is so similar to myself in terms of like really connecting to the deep, deep parts of herself. And this sense of like we just cannot do business or life or anything in the way that we used to. And so we wanted to jump on and really have a deep conversation about connecting within and connecting, to source and to God and to whoever it is that you believe in, and really, really get deep with that. And just like, the shift between the old paradigms and the new paradigms and how things are now. I just don't think we're living in the same world that we were a few years ago. So this is Dayna. Yeah, we said that we're not going to do this whole like old school marketing thing. Like we're just going to have, you guys in as a conversation. So yeah, let's just start our conversation.
Yeah, you said something that I would love to know more of your insights around, which is you said that the world's just changed so much. We don't live in the same world that we've lived in like a few years ago. Everything shifted and changed. We all know what happened. There was a global panini that changed the whole world and everything like flipped upside down, and which was a good thing. Like there's been so many gifts of that shift. But what would you say are the things that you really seen highlighted as these like really impactful changes that have particularly shifted things for you?
Yeah. So, I mean, I met you back in 2019, and I think for both of us, we were very, very different people to who we are.
100%.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like
not even the same.
it was like, how do I scale my business? 20K months, how do I get people in the door? Like it was so ego driven. And I think that that's the thing is like, I wouldn't have known that back then because my intention was always pure and loving. Like it always had the intention of like, how can I help other people grow their business and whatnot? But it also was from this space of like, how do I make more money? How do I stay in the luxury hotel? How do I, there was always some sort of like ego thing in that. And how does that present to the outside world and all of that sort of thing? And I think for a lot of the world, it was like that. It was very, very ego driven. It was very, very me, 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 me. Whereas I feel like now people are craving after COVID, deep, deep conversations, deep connection. It's this feeling of, and this is just my personal view, true or not, but this is just the feeling I get. And I feel very intuitive and I feel very connected to this is people don't want another program. People don't want another thing that they're going to be sold into. People don't want to be part of your money-making machine. It's like, how can you help me? How can you be there for me? How can you connect to me? That's the real feeling of it. And I just think like any sort of ego that comes up, it's just being like, people are going through these like big awakenings, these spiritual awakenings, because it's like, oh, you got ego there? Okay, cool. We're going to bang that out of you. That's the feeling of it. And for myself included, like I feel like I've gone through awakening after awakening after awakening, and I'm like, oh, okay, like I get it. It's almost like I'm kind of being pushed around from pillar to post a little bit, but in the most beautiful way, like in the most awakening, most connected, heartfelt way that I've ever felt. Like I don't think I've ever felt this connected to source, this grounded, this vulnerable. And I think that's the thing as well. Like it's just opening us all up to be vulnerable. Stop hiding behind your mask. People don't care about your mask. And yeah, I think that's the thing as well. It's like when people feel the mask, and we do, we're very, if you're watching this podcast or YouTube or wherever we're putting this, and you're connected to Dayna or myself, like we're the sorts of people who are very real, very raw, very vulnerable. And so you're connected to this because you feel that too, because on some level, like you just cannot handle another fake conversation. And I think that's what it was. So that was a big rant.
Yeah, so good.
What is it for you? Like, do you feel similarly? Do you have different views?
Yeah, I feel what you said. Like what I was thinking when you were talking was how the illusion of intimacy was kind of like stuck together through the fact that we could still like see each other and have these kind of superficial conversations. And then when 2020 happened, it was like everyone got that any type of intimacy that they did have in their life was really taken away from them. And it really, for me, it really showed me where I had my own illusions of intimacy, for sure, like where I thought that I had these certain connections that were deep or more meaningful, but they were so founded in an illusion or my own idea of, what I looked like from the outside looking in. And as those dynamics shifted and fell apart and dismantled, I went through, like I think many people did, a period of deep loneliness, of recognizing where I had severed off pieces of my soul to try to fit into certain spaces or fit into certain molds or fit into certain ideologies. And I could see where the kind of child part of me was really yearning to be a part of something. And I also recognized where I didn't actually belong, but I was conforming myself to fit in. And business for sure was one of those. Like you brought up business and this idea of like the 20K month and like getting people in the door and like setting up these systems and like this very beautifully driven, beautifully ambitious, and like you said, founded in good intentions, which is awesome. And also missing the true heart, the true why. I lost track with my why. I'll speak for myself. I lost touch and disconnected with my deep why. And I actually don't know if I ever really fully connected to my why before starting my business. Like when I started my business, it was a way to break me free of my old life. So I had the fortune of having a really big catalyst moment in my life pre-2020. I think for a lot of people, 2020 was this huge catalyst moment for them where a lot of the things that they thought were like stable, that they had worked their whole life to create infrastructure of stability, a certain job, a business, a relationship, whatever it was, those things were turned inside out because of 2020. Maybe someone who thought they were going to be in the same career for the next 20 years, they lost that job, or a relationship that they thought was their person. All of a sudden they were home 24/7 and they realized like, oh, whoa, this relationship actually isn't working unless we spend at least 8 hours apart from each other a day. What's going on here? Yeah, exactly. And so a lot of people had this really big awakening moment during that time in the world. And it was for me as well. But I was also very blessed in the sense that a couple years prior to that, I had already gone through this really big inversion in my life where everything turned on its head. And it was like I was in upside down world all of a sudden. And I had been in this life, this construct of a life that looked good from the outside looking in, but I was deeply unfulfilled. And I had my moment of like, I have to do something. For me, it was a mental health diagnosis. But every entrepreneur that I've talked to has had like this moment many times, usually many like death rebirth moments where it's like, oh my gosh, everything who I thought I was and what I thought was like mattered to me is like shattering. And it's that perpetual ego death of like really stepping into the truth of God's mission here for us. When we commit to that path, we're committing to shedding anything that isn't in alignment with it. And some things we hang on to a little bit longer than others because we're just like, oh, this one's really hard to let go of, whatever that is for us.
Always scared of what.
Yes, exactly. And so for me, I had that moment like a couple of years prior, and my building of my business and becoming a nomad and like becoming a minimalist, and that became my identity. It was like what freed me from my old life, what freed me from this mental health diagnosis, what freed me from my 7-year relationship falling apart, what saved me from living like this kind of like normal societal life that I had created that wasn't fulfilling me. And I became really attached to my identity as like a nomad and as a business owner and like a 6-figure business. And and an entrepreneur and like the social media feed and the badass with like these really strong boundaries. And I wore a lot of like bright colored lipstick, and not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just not who I really was. It was this persona that I created to free myself, but it was still an illusion of safety. It was still an illusion of stability. It was still an illusion of who I really was. It wasn't my true identity. So yeah, so for me, that was the biggest thing that shifted. It was a very humbling experience. I've gone through a lot of humility in the last couple of years, and I don't think humility is a bad thing. I think it has like a negative connotation a lot of the time, but humility to me just means like the willingness to see where I thought that I had it all figured out, but God had a different plan for me. And so that's been the biggest transition for me over the last couple of years.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Do you know what? I don't know if you can see this on the camera, but I actually do have tears in my eyes as you're talking, because I relate so deeply to everything that you said. Can I ask you a question? And it might be a bit weird, but whatever, because that's just me. What year did you go through your pre-awakening? Because I kind of have this theory at the moment. It feels like there are certain people, and I think, leaders within the industry and that sort of thing, who tend to be going through the same thing at the same time. Like, I've kind of noticed this pattern where it's like, certain people tend to be going through the thick of it, and then they come out of it, and then they're in the creative vortex, and then they're back in the thick of it again. And I'm like, there just feels like a pattern. And when you said that you had a pre-awakening of sorts, I was like, that's exactly how you described it is exactly what happened to me. So I'm kind of curious, like, what year that happened for you.
Yeah, definitely. My big kind of catalyst, the first like life altering shifting moment, was in 2000, and it would have been 2018. The summer of 2018 is when like things really started to shift, which makes sense. I was on the cusp of my Saturn return. It was like my Saturn return was beginning. And so my Saturn return, everything changed. Like, I went from being in a marriage that was, with the same person for 7 years, from being a chef, from like being really addicted to substances, like really struggling with alcohol, weed, basically anything to kind of numb my social anxiety, to like get me through my day-to-day life. But my life looked great from the outside looking in. Like, I was married to a really attractive partner who had a really successful job. I was living in the Cayman Islands at the time. I was a chef. I was like on boat parties every weekend. So I had like great pictures on Facebook. So like my life looked really good. But when all of that shattered would have been 2018.
That's so interesting. So for me, it wasn't quite 2018, but it was 2016. I was in my lounge room, and there was I was shutting my blind to my lounge room, and the blind fell on my head, and I kind of blacked out for a minute, but didn't really know what had happened. And so I called the hospital. I was like, I don't know what's happened here, kind of thing. They're like, maybe come get checked out. So they just basically said to me, yep, you have a mild concussion. That's it. Left it at that. And then after that, I kept on getting all of these headaches. And one day they were particularly bad. And so I went into hospital, and they said to me, there's a mass on your brain, and it's either brain cancer, brain bleed, or some sort of brain disease. We don't know what it is. And so they were testing me like I was some sort of little guinea pig or something like that. And I remember sitting in the hospital, and I'm not somebody who prays very often. And I reached out to God, and I was like, you know what, I will do, if you give me another chance at life, I will do it better. I will make sure that I make the most of this life. Just please do not let it be the worst case scenario. I'm only 26 years old. I'm not ready for this, please. And I begged. I really, really begged. And they came back to me and they said to me, you know what, it looks like it's just a minor stroke. We're not really sure what the mass in your brain is. It could just be scar tissue from when the pole hit your head. We're just going to keep an eye on it, make sure that it doesn't grow or change, because without actually going and doing brain surgery, they wouldn't have known kind of if it was cancer or not. They didn't want to, you know, offer chance. So they just monitored me for the next 2 years. It didn't change or anything like that. And I seem to have gotten better. And within that 6 months, I was like, okay, cool. So, and it was interesting actually, being in hospital like that, you really get to know who your people are and who they aren't. And it took like the guy who I was seeing at the time, my ex-narcissist who I was on and off for like 10 years almost, it took him about 5 days to come in and see me. It took my own mum 3 days to come in and see me. And some of the friends who I thought would come and see me didn't. And I was like, like, what have I created? Like, I've got this job that I really hate, friends who aren't really there, this relationship that is just so toxic and has me so codependent in it. And I was like, okay, well, I made this promise to God and he came through. So it's now my turn to, you know, keep good on my promise. And so I went and got counseling. I left that relationship. I ditched some of those friendships, and that all took about 6 months. And then after that, I was like, I think I'm ready to start my business. And so I started my business. And I literally put one post up on Instagram. And that one post reached out to this woman in America. And she was like, how do I work with you? And I was shocked. Like, I didn't even have a bank account or anything set up. I was just so blown that this thing could like have actually happened. And then within 3 weeks, I had 3 clients, like from all around the world. And then I started dating again, and I dated this guy who was not my husband. It was just before I met him. And he was just such a test. Like, he was such a test to, you know, who are you willing to be? What are you willing to put up with, kind of thing. And so I realized that he was the test, and I let him go lovingly. And a week later, I met my husband. And so we kind of like had this planned, you know, we're going to go, like, I'm going to leave my job. We're going to go overseas in 2019 is what the plan was. And then there one day in 2018, and it's interesting because it's probably, because you were in the US, it probably was like your summer would have been my winter. So it would have been around the same time. And I was looking at villas online, and I said to Caleb, I was like, babe, you know what? I don't have any savings in the bank right now, but let's just make a plan. Let's just leave at the end of this year. Let's just book this right now, and let's just leave at the end of the year. I have no fucking idea how I'm going to do this. I've only got like a couple of clients, you know, that, like, at the time I had a really bad money mindset. So like, you know, they weren't paying me enough to kind of supplement my income. And I was like, you know what, babe, let's just stuff it, like, you know, do it. So we booked it, and I was like, shit, I've got 6 months to do this. So I went into work and I was like, hey guys, you know, I'm going to leave at the end of this year. I'm giving you heaps of notice to find someone else. Yeah. And it's interesting because I made this big thing to like run away and to break free, and like you said, you know, to really live that nomadic lifestyle and be a business owner, and, you know, run away from this life that had seemingly looked great, like same sort of thing as what you were saying, you know, like I had this wonderful man in my life. We were living in South Yarra, which is a nice suburb in Melbourne. You know, I had, you know, what would seem like a really great job and all of that sort of thing, but I wasn't happy in any of it. So I was like, okay, like, let's just do this. And so we packed up our life and moved to Bali. But I think like that was kind of the first spiritual awakening. So when you said that before, like, I really get that, but it was from this space of like, how do I run away from something, you know? And I think it was continuously like that, like keep running. And then 2020 hit, and I was like, oh, you can't run anymore. There's no more running for you. And so it kind of stopped me in my tracks. Like, I think it did a lot of us that were running.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I really like, I really realize and recognize how I had broken all of these other patterns in my life. I had a very similar kind of story with like toxic relationship cycles. Like, love and dating have been huge lessons for me, like some of the biggest lessons. And And I really feel like the energetics of love are very similar to our stories around money frequently, because they're very similar in the terms that they're like really grounded in our worth, our innate sense of self-worth, and how much of a relationship we have with that. It's not that any one person is more or less worthy than the other. So it's not about, like, to me, it's not about increasing our worth. It's about remembering it. And I, for most of my life, just did not even know that I had any sense of worth. And that, I think, like, when I've done clinical hypnotherapy and I've done inner child healing and I've gone back in my timeline, there's multiple moments throughout my life where that really happened, but I can see how my worthiness around men and love really got destroyed after my sexual assault when I was 17. And then it was just from there, it was kind of like I went through these traumatic cycles with really horribly toxic relationships right up until the point that I met my husband. And when I met my ex-husband, it was just like he was this golden child savior. And he saved me. He saved me from those cycles. And so even that was a pattern, like something saving me, right? A man saving me, an amount of money saving me, nomad life saving me. It was just like I was looking for something consistently outside of myself to save me from myself, from these patterns. But it's like, well, if I just, once I have a 6-figure business, I'll be happy. Once I move to Bali, I'll be happy. Once I'm a minimalist, I'll be happy. Once I meet my soulmate, I'll be happy. Once I, and I think most people spend their whole life, unfortunately, running, looking for that thing that's finally going to save them from their reality. And unfortunately, most people, they are searching for those things, whether it's fame, whether it's money, whether it's the soulmate, and they spend their whole life seeking, never actually achieving it. And so therefore never achieving it and realizing, oh shit, this doesn't actually fulfill or satisfy me either. Now what? Now what do I do? So I'm really like grateful that I was so young to have such a big rupture in my life. And also that I was brave and courageous enough to just be like, well, I'll just do whatever. Like, I've got nothing to lose now. Like, I bought a one-way ticket with like $200 in my bank account, and I put everything in a suitcase and sold everything else. And I had no business plan. Like, I was just like, my going is the plan. Like at this point.
Yeah.
So it did serve me in a way. Like, I'm really grateful that I was running, because that running helped me discover and helped me learn as I went. Whereas like some people will never grab their dream and be like, okay, I'm just going to do it. We like sit there and plan and strategize. And it does often take that big rupture. Like for you, it was also this health diagnosis and being in the hospital and having this moment of prayer. You're literally like your come to Jesus moment of like, God, like, God, I promise if you get me through this, I will do something with my life. And a lot of us wait for that moment. I don't think it's necessary, but it's definitely something that I've seen in all of my kindred entrepreneurial friends, all of the people who have decided to walk a path of purpose and mission and intentional living and discovering fulfillment and seeking joy and breaking patterns and healing. All of those people who I know have that similarity in their story, some sort of catalyst moment where they were asked to confront everything that they had done up until that point and say, is this really what you want? Are you really going to settle for this? A lot of people do. They just settle for it. They're like, yeah, this is good enough because like, whatever, it's like, fine. But then when something like that happens, where you go to the hospital and they're like, yeah, well, you might have brain cancer. Like that is a moment of, oh my gosh, like, what if this was it? Would I be happy with the way I've lived my life up until this point? And so, I've heard everything from it being like death to like a loved one dying, or a person's own near-death experience, or a health diagnosis, or a mental health diagnosis, or an addiction, or a breakup, like a really big breakup, or whatever it is like that. But there is that similarity of the catalyst moment. So was that your first one? Was that your first like really big catalyst moment?
Definitely my first one. And And it's really interesting because as much as it was like a runaway moment, like I'm going to run away from things, you know, so I can get away from that life and have freedom and that sort of thing. There was so much beauty in it as you were talking. It really came to my mind of like self-trust, like to go and build a life like that, to scrap everything that you've known takes an enormous amount of self-trust, like because there are so many decisions in that. It was like, if I leave these friendships behind, do I know on the other side that I'm going to make new and even better, more fulfilling, more enhancing friendships? I didn't know that. Like, for all I knew, I could have just been lonely old little Donna for the rest of my life. But, you know, like, it wasn't like that. And, you know, when I left that relationship, you know, there was the normal fears of like, what if he goes and finds somebody else and then he changes for her, but he didn't ever change for me? And what would that mean about me? And blah, 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 blah. And I literally had to be like, you know what, burn your bridges, who cares? Like the likelihood is, like if he's been like this for 10 years, the likelihood is that he's not going to change. And even if he does, it doesn't matter. Like it's not about that. Like you want something better. And whilst ever you're giving so much to this man and not creating space for something new, you don't get to experience the thing that you say that you want. So if you really want that thing that you say that you want, Donna, then you need to trust yourself enough to leave that behind. And so it was like this whole shredding. I felt like a snake, just shredding and shredding and shredding all of these different areas of my life and just trusting. My gosh, listen, there are a lot of trust in that, you know, there would be something even better on the other side. And the thing is that there always was. You know, when I left my job, there was something better on the other side. Like there was this life that meant that, you know, on, like I was saying to you before we, you know, press record, like yesterday was one of those days where it was really rainy and cold. And I used to get up in those days at 7 o'clock in the morning and go to a job and rock up in the office with wet socks and shoes and feel like I'd have like, you know, smushy, like little feet all day. Because, you know, like that was my life back then. Whereas yesterday I was like, oh, I'm going to sit in bed with my laptop and cuddle up and open the window and look at the rain outside as I do my work. And that's my life now. And so it was this whole thing of like, trust yourself to know that there's something better on the other side of this, even if it makes absolutely no sense and that feels scary and you have to leave a whole heap of stuff behind. Just trust and make the decision. And it was, for all of them, it was kind of like, I couldn't bear to be in that spot anymore anyway. Like that was part of it. Bear to have friends like that who wouldn't come and visit me in hospital. I couldn't bear to be in a relationship where it took him 5 days to come and see me. I couldn't bear to be in that job anymore where it felt like my soul was being sucked out. And I could see that there was something, you know, that I could do that would actually make me really, really happy and impact the world in a greater way. Like all of those decisions, it was like this full body decision of like, I can't stay there anymore. Like it's just, I'm done with that now, you know. And so there was no but to trust what's on the other side. But I think, like you said before, as you have those moments, you start to learn that I don't have to let it get that bad. I don't have to wait for it to get so bad that I make a decision like that. I can just trust that it will be better on the other side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that. You brought up a couple things for me when you were talking. One was like, I think most people are kind of waiting for someone or something outside of themselves to change. And they're just like, oh, well, it's that thing that needs to change. It's my toxic partner that needs to change, or it's my bad job, or my crappy boss, or the government, or, you know, the social climate, or like whatever it is, like that thing needs to change before I can change, before I can claim this change for myself. And I think that's one of the gifts of those catalyst moments, is there the recognition of like, oh, I have to do this. It's that reclamation of power of like, oh, I'm going to stop giving away my authority or my sovereignty to these people or these things outside of myself. And I'm going to claim it for my own. And like, yeah, that's terrifying because I'm super conditioned to think that I need all of these things to take care of me. But I actually am going to go on this journey of taking care of myself and changing myself and being the change that I want to see. And you also like brought up a point for me. I was reflecting a little bit on like my story of buying my one-way ticket and becoming a nomad and becoming a minimalist. And I was thinking about how I felt very similarly, like I need to just trust myself. Like I need to just do this for me and I need to trust myself. And I think that was a huge gift in that moment of time. And I think in the last couple of years, that's transitioned a little bit for me, because a lot of it has like, I learned like, okay, yeah, I can trust myself, and I need to trust in something bigger than myself. And that's been a lot of the humility that I talked about like coming to letting go of these ego attachments to my identity. Cause it's like, when I believe that I need to trust myself, and it's like me, myself, and like, I need to do this for me, it's like, okay, I need to build a 6-figure business, and I need to do this, and I need to do that, and I need to and it's like, and I need to have really strong boundaries, and I just have this persona, and it's like my social media has got to look like this, and it's like really intense. And I was holding that for the first few years of my journey, and then it was this like dismantling and this continuous humbling of me getting brought to my knees again and again, through the recognition that I actually am not the one in control, that I'm actually, there's a really big discernment to be had between when I'm following my ego's desire to run away from pain versus when I'm following God's calling to go towards my pleasure, to go towards my fulfillment. And that's been really humbling, in the sense that like, it's meant shutting down a 6-figure business. It's like, I remember the moment where I had the idea for You Are Intuit, and it was like, I was in Bali still, and I was in the bathtub, and I had just created what I felt like was stability in my business. Like I had consistent recurring income, and like everything was good, and had all these systems set up. And I was having like this sticky time receiving the guidance of like what this next thing was going to be, this creation. And I was like, what? Like I heard the name, and I got this, like, why isn't it flowing? Like, and then I got the guidance very clearly, like shut down Rebelpreneurs, like shut down your company, like completely start over, like burn it to the ground. And I started crying because I had burned it to the ground so many times already at that point. And I was like, when is this going to end? Like, when am I finally going to like not have to burn it to the freaking ground every time, because it's so out of alignment? And then I like kind of started laughing, because I was like, well, the answer is right there. Like, it's so out of alignment. Like you only have to burn it to the ground if you're not doing God's will, is what I would phrase it as now. Back then, I don't think have that awareness. I wasn't quite there in my relationship with God and my union with God. But at that point, like I did have the clarity of like, oh, well, because it's out of alignment, like you're still running away from pain, like you're still running away from, which is so different. Running away from pain is so different than running towards purpose. Like they're not the same thing at all. And yeah, that's been like, it's been super, just, it's been heart opening. You already touched on this, like how heart opening that process and that journey is, because I always felt like this chip on my shoulder of like, I'm not supported, and like life's hard and I have to fight for myself. Like it's survival, it's scarcity, right? When you're running away from pain, like you're in survival and you're in scarcity of like, well, I have to trust myself, and I have to become independent, and I need to do this. And like, there's this driving force of fear of like, I'm not going to be taken care of. And for me, the last couple of years has been dropping into the reality that all of it is provision from God. All of it. Like every bad relationship, every crappy situation, every rut in my business, every time that I've been like, why isn't this working? And I've been so mad at God. It's literally God being like, I'm providing you with what you wanted. Like you set out on this mission, you committed to this path. Like I am giving you exactly the provision that you need right now to make sure that you get there. And that changed everything for me. I was like, oh, okay. That was like the beginning of my healing of my relationship with the masculine. Like I had been so focused on like forgiving past relationships and like cutting cords with toxic people and like doing all of this basically spiritual bypassing work, which was, you know, my exes need to change and this needs to change and like manipulative people need to change and like all of this. And it's like, no, Dayna, you need to change. You need to listen to your discernment. Like, you need to actually have discernment, like take personal accountability for where you're operating from your ego and from where you hang on to things for too long because of your attachments. Because if you would listen to your discernment every single step of the way, God never would have given you the provision of needing to burn down a 6-figure business. That wouldn't have happened. But you brought yourself there, and then God gave you what you needed to shift back into alignment. So things have been a lot more graceful since then. They're still like not in not in my control. Like, I still, like, things shift and change, but there's just a lot less resistance. Like, I'm not in that fight and that struggle with God about like, why are you providing for me? And like, why isn't this working? And then like, that's when in the past I would turn to like the guru or the someone outside of myself and be like, give me the answers. Like, I need the formula. And then I would follow somebody else's formula to success. And then I would end up successful, but really unhappy and unfulfilled. And then I would, start the cycle all over again. So since having that realization, there's been a lot more grace and ease in the process.
Yes. Some of you may not be like kind of watching this from YouTube or whatever. And so the whole time I was just nodding because I felt all of that so deeply. Oh man. I feel like, yeah, that's what 2020 did. It was, I don't regret anything beforehand, because I kind of feel like all of that, like, I have to do it and rah, 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 was exactly what I needed to kind of break free of the paradigm that I was in at that point in time. So I don't regret that by any means. And I go, yep, that was all part of the journey. That's beautiful just as it is. But I do think it was kind of the same thing. Like when 2020 hit, I had literally everything that I wanted. And then when I had my daughter, like I literally had everything that I ever wanted. Like that was, the absolute like big tick off the list. And I kind of went, well, now what? And it was that same sort of feeling of like, oh, I have to burn everything to the ground. It's so all unaligned and, and so there were some really cool things in that, because like, this is kind of what I was thinking as you were talking before, is like, I don't think we, as humans having like this human experience, I don't think that we sometimes stop enough to go, why do I want that? Why do I want this business? Why do I want this money? Why do I want to be in this relationship or have this child or whatever it is? Like, it's not, I don't think decisions are always consciously made. And so that's why we find ourselves in this space of, feeling so unaligned and feeling so unfulfilled and that sort of thing, because it's like, well, why do I want this? What sort of feeling am I chasing? Because I think that's ultimately what it comes down to, is like, I'm chasing some sort of feeling here. If I get this, then I'm going to get something from this, and aka whatever feeling it is, fulfillment, happiness, whatever. And so that's something that I've been very, very aware of now. Like whenever I'm creating anything, I'm like, why do I want this thing? Like, what is this? What is the feeling that I perceive that I'm going to get from this thing? And just really being honest with myself about whether it's something that I want or not. And so I feel like after kind of burning my business down and, resigning, I fully resigned from being a business coach. I was like, I don't think I'm a business coach. Like, I think I'm here for deeper things than that. I think I'm here to call people forward, to get them to be the best versions of themselves. And maybe that is in business, maybe it's in relationships, maybe it's whatever, but I feel like I'm here to pull people out and call them forward. And so I think part of that is like, what, why do you want those things, and I'm just so conscious of that. And then also the beautiful paradigm of like, what if you don't have that thing? And something I realized, this was in just January this year, it was like, if all the money, if all the like living in Bali, if all of the luxury experiences that I've had and all of that sort of thing went away, and literally like we were down to our last dime, we had to go back to my husband's parents' house and live in their little basement and, all the rest of it, would I be okay? If I had to go and get a job, would I be okay? Like, yeah, I wouldn't love going and getting a job, to be honest with you, after having years of like not working for anyone, but I'd be okay, because the only thing that really, really matters to me is my husband and my child. Like, that's all that really matters to me, at the core of it. It's us three. We're happy, we're healthy. That's all I care about. all this other stuff is just additional blessings that I get to have in my life, you know, additional things that make me happy. I love being in Bali because I love the sun. The sun makes me feel happy. Being in the warmth makes me feel happy. We were living in Dunedin in New Zealand, which is like the bottom of New Zealand. It was freezing cold, and I realized that that's not something that makes me happy. So like all of my decisions now are just so like, what will make my soul feel happy, you know? And it's very much from that space, like consciously. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, I mentioned this, I think, before we hit record, but I'm in the final edits for a book that I'm writing that came through while I've been in this fairy forest cabin in the mountains of Colombia for a couple of months. And you touched on one of the questions that changed my life. And it was like, I had this moment of just, if everything was already taken care of, if the money was taken care of, if the home was taken care of, if the love of my life is inevitable and it's already on the way, or it's already here, like if all of these things that I'm constantly wondering, like how, what do I need to do, if all of that was like no longer a question, what would I actually be doing with my life? Because I operated for so much of my life from that place of like, how, what do I need to do, that like that question actually made me stop and do what you just said, which is like, why? If all of that was inevitable, like it's already done, why would I be doing everything that I'm doing every single day? And that's like, most people never slow down enough to sit with themselves and ask themselves that question. Like, I love that. And yeah, I had that moment recently too. I was talking to a friend of mine on the phone, and I was like, I let go of all my high ticket offerings. I had this moment where I was like, the only reason I'm doing this is because I'm chasing that feeling. Like I'm chasing this feeling of like being a high ticket coach, being a paid coach, like the hit of like getting, you know, a $40,000 like one-time payment, or like all these different things. Nothing wrong with any of those, except my attachments to how they made me feel, which were feeding a certain piece of my ego's identity. Like nothing fundamentally wrong with any of those things. But for me, I was in this cycle and in this pattern. And I was like, okay, none of that actually matters to me right now. Like I actually want to build a community, and I actually want to finish my book, and I actually want to start to think about like homesteading, and I want to look at properties and look at land that I want to buy. I want to stop buying plane tickets, because I've been talking about doing that for a year now, and I'm still in a foreign country, not close to my family. Like I cry every time I think about my family, because like the last couple of years I've realized how supportive they are. Like I had such that chip on my shoulder that I was talking about earlier, where I realized that this little girl in me has been fighting with them my whole life, fighting to prove that they weren't actually there for me, because I had the belief that they weren't, and was seeking evidence that they didn't care about what I was doing. And the last couple of years, as I've humbled myself and I've called my mom and I've been my authentic self on the phone with her, and I've told her what's actually real and alive for me, and I've called my dad and I've like listened to him with an open heart and like genuinely opened myself up to talk to him about what's going on in his world. And as I've done this ancestral healing work with my sister, and we have very different perspectives, but we have like so many fundamental core values that are the same, and we've healed so much of our lineage together, even though we've had very different upbringings in the same household. And as I've like done all of that, and I've humbled myself enough to stop seeking evidence that like it's about me and I need to take care of myself and I'm unsupported, and I've like let myself open up to receive provision. It started with me recognizing that it was all provision from God, like I talked about earlier. But then that started to reflect back out into my reality, where I was like, wow, like I've been so provided for and so supported. And I just want to be close to my family. Like, I just want to be close to my family for when I do meet my person, for when I do get pregnant and have a baby, like for all of these things that I know are deep desires and fundamental drivers, but that I've been denying myself for so long, trying to feel ready by doing all these other things first. It's like, oh yeah, I'll deserve what I really want once I have all of these other things. And it's like, so backwards.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I
yeah,
actually had something come into my mind. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut
Yeah,
you off.
please. No, please.
So as you were talking, one of the things that came into my mind, and it was a thought that I had earlier this year, and something that I've had to work through is like, you get to this point, I think, when you've been humbled and humbled and humbled and humbled, and you start to question, why do I actually want this thing? You know, what's the purpose of it? What's the feeling that I'm chasing? And so when I had that realization of like, if it was just me, Caleb, and Zali living in Caleb's parents' basement, like that is like my ultimate worst case scenario, right? Like if it actually got to that, when I think about that, I'm like, so then why do we need anything? Like, why do we need the house or the whatever it is? And so then I got really, really in my head and really confused about it, because I was like, oh, I just feel so humbled that none of those things actually matter, but I want them. Right. And so like, I really felt like this sense of like, well, okay, so I want these ego things, but you know, I know why I want them. I know the feeling that I feel like I'm going to have once I have them. And also, I know that I don't need them. So why do I want them? And do you get what I'm saying? And so,
Yeah.
yeah, that was like a real sticking point for me. Like it was a real moment of confusion. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, because where I kind of landed on it is that my desires are the things that make me happy. And when I'm happy, I give to the world more from a whole place, you know, from a place of, you know, feeling like, oh, I'm so in overflow that I want to give more, kind of thing. That was the only thing I could land on, because I was like, I actually don't need any of this now, which is a really strange awakening to have. So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
A couple things come up for me. I had this theory of desire. This is something that came through to me during a meditation once, that I was like, oh, like, okay. And it clicked for me. And when it landed, it just relieved a lot of pressure for me. And it was that I believe we have desires because a version of us in time and space, because those things are irrelevant, and we know that they're non-linear. Like we understand that they're non-linear, and science is growing and developing to back up what we already know to be true. Like, I mean, we astral travel and we do all of these things that, like, we know that time and space are not real in the way that we imagine them to be. And I know that the only reason I would have a desire is because there's a version of me who's already created that and is sending this signal to me, this version of me who is in this time and space, and is like, oh yeah, you're going to have this and see how good it feels. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah, like it feels so good having that thing. And that is, to me, that's what desire is in the now. I'm like, I already know how good it feels to have this thing. Otherwise, I wouldn't want it at all. Like, why would I want it otherwise? If it's a true desire, if it's real, like if it's not attached to the ego, like you were just talking about, where it's like, oh, well, once I have $1 million, then my mom and dad will be proud of me. And then that'll like fulfill this. And it's not based in that wound. If it's really based from this healed place of just like pure gratitude and love, that desire, it's like, oh, well, it's already a done deal because I'm experiencing this in the already having of it. So that's like one point that came up for me. And then the other thing that came up for me when you were speaking is, this for me is about, again, my relationship with God, where a lot of my prayers the last, I'd say like 6 months, a year, have been like, if not this, then something better. Like, I trust you. Like, I understand that I'm not in control. I understand that if I end up in my parents' basement, it's because you have a plan for me, and like, use me. Like, I'm available for that. Like, if that is your will, then let it be done. And I trust that God is taking me to a place where I am fully fulfilled and satisfied when I surrender myself to him, when I really submit to the greater vision that God has for my life, and I stop trying to micromanage and control. And in fact, when I reflect on my own life, the only time that I've ever ended up somewhere like in my parents' basement, or, you know, in a place where I have like very little money, or like things are like really tight and I feel really restricted, it's always been because I wasn't submitting to God's
Yeah.
provision. It's always been because I was resisting. It's always been because I was trying to control. And the only way that God could put me back on track with what I came here to do, and the very strong intentional prayer that I have set out to live into my highest potential and to do God's work in this world through me, has been him like being like, hey, right. And it's like, and this is the this is the masculine. It's that masculine containment coming in and providing the boundary and the structure and the regimen that is necessary for me to be a creator, to do what I do best, particularly as a woman. Like, I'm literally designed to create. Like, you're a mom, like you're designed to create life, like you're literally made for it. And so for me, it's like, every time I end up there, I'm like, okay, I'm not submitting to God. Like, I'm really not. Because when I do submit to God, things flow. They flow better than I could ever orchestrate them in my tiny little human mind, from the perception of like, okay, like it's going to go like this, and then this is going to happen, and then this milestone, and then this goal. When I really let go of my preconceived notion of how everything is going to happen, and I truly submit, and I'm like, yes, like I am in submission to you. I am humbled at your feet, like whatever it is that is meant to be me, my initiation in order to become who I am here to become, to do the work that you would have me do in this paradigm and in this lifetime. Like, let thy will be done. And when I do that, things line up for me better than I could have ever orchestrated them. The right people come out of the woodwork, the right opportunities, the money, like people just come out of nowhere. Like, things happen that I'm just like, what? And then I reflect on it and I'm like, I couldn't have done that. Like, I had no idea that it could have happened like that. I was looking over here and it was coming from over there. And as soon as I stopped looking over there and I was like, yeah, like, God, like, bring yourself into the room. Like, I need you right now. I understand that I haven't been admitting that I need you. God's like, okay, here, like, it's been here the whole time. Like, open up your eyes, turn your head, like, stop fighting with me. And then it's done.
Oh, do you know what? I love that answer for two reasons. Because first of all, it actually helped me from my very basic answer that I had for myself, which was like, oh, well, like, I'm meant to have my desires. It makes me happy. Then, you know, if I'm happy, I give more to the world. Like, it took me on a deeper level there. So thank you. I really, really appreciate that. But also, as you were talking, I've always understood co-creation. I've always understood my part, God's part. I don't think that I've ever understood it on the level that it just landed for me in this very moment in time on the 14th of April 2023 at 9:59. Like, as you were talking, here's what came to my mind, right? I started thinking about like my very, very first job. So when I left school, I was like, I don't want to be like going into uni or whatever. Like, I just felt like I was done with school. I'd had enough of school. And so I was like, I want to go work in a law firm. Like, I just always, you know, I loved the show Suits. I loved the idea of like working in a law firm, getting all dressed up, you know, being in an office. And I was like, you know, I'm really good at typing. Like, I could be a legal secretary or something like that. So like, that was my goal, you know. And so I went to this, and like, just so I can kind of like break it down for you, I was thinking in that moment, there was a future self of me who had already done that, who had already gone into that office and was all dressed up in her heels and her outfit and all the rest of it, feeling really cool in her office in the city or whatever. So anyway, that's kind of what came up. I was like, oh, there's the future timeline thing. Here's the human me going, okay, well, I'm going to follow that feeling. And so I did. I went and I applied for like all of these law firms. And there was this one that was actually local to me. And I remember having this thought of like, oh, that's not exactly what I want, because like I kind of pictured it in the city. But, you know, I'm 18, I don't have any experience. So like, you know, let's just go see, you know, what they say. And this guy turns around to me and he says, no, we're not taking you because you have messy handwriting. Now, I had, for one thing, like, never ever been told I had messy handwriting. Like, everyone always complimented me for my handwriting. So it was just like, what? And then I was like, it's just such a weird thing to say as well. Like, it was such a weird thing. But then literally as I was leaving the office, and this is where the second part of it comes in, where you kind of said that like God will just like move things around to make sure you stay on the right path, because innately I did know that. Like I had the thought that come into my mind of like, oh, it's not really what I want, but you know, getting in a job is getting in a job kind of thing. It was almost like God in that moment was like, no, you wanted this, so come on, let's just move you along. And I'm walking out of the office back to the train station, and because I didn't have a car at the time. And as I was walking to the train station, I get a call from a recruitment person. And she was like, hey, there's this job that's in the city. You know, do you want to come and have an interview this afternoon? And I was like, okay. And she's like, it's not for the position that you want. Like, it's for mailroom position, but there's room for you for a secretarial position. She's like, just get your foot in the door. And I was like, all right, like, you know, can't hurt to just go check it out and have a look. I don't have to take the job or whatever. Anyway, I went in there. I really liked the building. The building was like everything that I dreamed of. Like it was this big, luxurious, like classy building. I could just imagine myself walking in there every day. Like it was just this vibe. And I really loved the people as I was walking in there. And so I was like, yeah, okay, like this feels like the job for me. So anyway, 2 hours later, I get a call. Actually, it wasn't even 2 hours later because I was on the train on the way home. So it's probably like an hour later, I get a call to give me the job. And here's the thing is like, it was the things that you were talking about. It was like the timeline of me. I got to kind of step into that timeline of all of these things. But then God had also given me these things because he was pushing me on the right track. And it wasn't so much for me to have the job in the law firm, because interestingly enough, this job in the law firm was where I met my ex-narcissist. And he was like the catalyst for so many things, so much healing around my codependency. I call him my ex-narcissist because I'd rather not use his name and respect his privacy in that. You know, but like, you know, I can see beyond the labels now. But I kind of use that language just so I don't have to refer to him. But yeah, like he was the catalyst for so much of my healing, so much of my codependency, so much of my childhood stuff. You know, he was, when I first started coaching, I was coaching women out of relationships that were not good for them, you know, and that was the start of my coaching journey in my business. And all of this had to happen through me getting this job and then meeting him and then going through all of that and then realizing that I didn't want to be in law and I didn't want to be in that relationship, for me to then be coaching and actually helping people around the world, you know, in various different ways, you know, getting them to step into their power and whatnot. And so when I think about that, I'm like, oh, you did have this grand plan for me. You know, I thought that he was the one. But no, God was like, no, he's not the one. He's just the one that's here to teach you the things that you need to learn in order to get to this space so that you can help others and so that you can be a better version of yourself, kind of thing. So yeah, that's my long-winded way of sharing with you how those two things really landed and how this level of like, I hadn't actually clicked until now how powerful co-creation is.
Yeah. I love that. I love that it landed. Mark that date on the calendar.
Yeah.
I fully feel you. And yeah, like that makes me think of that point that we were talking about earlier, where it's like, it's all provision and we fight it sometimes and we resist it. Like I recently came out of a short, like it was only 3.5 month relationship where I dove all in with someone and I gave it everything. Like I loved fully, like heart wide open. And then I realized very quickly, like, oh, wow, there's like toxic, very textbook narcissistic and codependent patterns playing out here. And I witnessed it and I saw it and I was like, oh my gosh, okay. And afterwards I was like, oh, like why did that happen? And I had like a good week of just like really being in my victim story of like, oh, this sucks. And like, what a dickhead. And and like all these things, you know, coming up for me. And then it really quickly shifted. And I started to see it through this much more objective lens and this much higher perspective. And I was able to see like how perfect it was and how perfectly orchestrated it was and how like perfectly divine it was to get me to where I am in this literal exact moment that feels so like synchronistic and magical. And I mean, even the relationship in so many ways, like it coming in the way it did and all the things, like it was so perfect. And it's not that like we get an idea in our head of like, okay, I want a business like this and a relationship like this. And then we feel it and we're like, okay, we feel the desire, we feel the end goal achieved. That's what the desire is, right? We feel the end goal achieved, but then we think we know how to get there. We're like, oh yeah, it's going to be a law firm. Like I want to dress up every day and it's going to be like this. And then we like follow that path. And then God is like, okay, here's the nudge. And we're like, oh my gosh, nothing's going according to plan. What's happening? It's not working out at all. And then we arrive somewhere and then we look back and we're like, oh, whoa. It's always in the hindsight. And that is literally the logistics of a miracle. Like the miraculous cannot be planned by the human mind. And we forget that because we pray for miracles. We're like, okay, God, like I want $1 million business and I want a relationship like this and I want to live in a home like this. And then we're like, okay, cool. Now I'm going to like go map out the next 6 months of exactly how all of that's going to come to fruition.
Yeah.
And it's like, girl, you just prayed, like you just asked for all of these things. Like, where is God in your 6-month goal setting plan where you're like, like mapping it all out and like time blocking your calendar and like doing all of these things. And it's funny because it is always in the hindsight that it makes sense. And we like forget that and create this illusion before it happens that we're in the driver's seat somehow. And that is part of the humility for me. That's been part of the humbling process, is the recognition of like, I'm really not in the driver's seat at all 99% of the time. And like you touched on it earlier because it's like, oh, like we think we're making all these conscious choices, but even the way we're designed, like our conscious mind is only actually responsible for like 5%, according to what the research that I've read on the science of the brain. From what we know currently, it's really only about 5% of our day-to-day decisions that are actually made by the conscious. And it's this illusion. We have this illusion that like, yeah, I'm so in control. And it's like, it's actually quite funny. And it's painful to think that we're in control. It's really painful. And a lot of the ease and the grace that I was speaking to earlier isn't because I'm more in control of my life now. Like that's not it. It's because I've admitted that I'm less in control than I thought I was. Big shift.
Yes. Sorry, I just felt that so deeply that it just came out.
Yeah, don't be sorry. Like I was done and I was like, yeah, let it land. Like it's true. Like it's so good. It's so liberating.
You know what's funny? I said to Caleb, you know how people have those like words of the year, you know, that they do every year. Oh, my word is power, my word is courage, my word is effortlessness, ease, whatever. I said to Caleb, I'm like, I'm not doing one of those word things or whatever, but what I am doing this year and what my theme of this year is that I'm willing to be pleasantly surprised by life. And it came to me like my theme as you were talking, because I was like, wow, isn't that so interesting? Like one of the things that I think I've done as well is I have surrendered. I've gotten really humble to realize I'm not in control, so much so that is the theme of my year. And the interesting part about that is that literally I have been surprised time and time and time. And when I say surprised, like pleasantly surprised time and time again this year, you know, through like a friend saying to me, hey, I've got this beautiful luxury Airbnb up in Woodwood. Why don't you come and spend the weekend with me? You don't have to worry about paying for it. I've paid for it all. Like, just come be with me, you know, or manifesting a free dessert, you know, from a restaurant at dinner because they liked us. Or, you know, my in-laws, like we're having our wedding at the end of this year and they kind of came in and they surprised us. Like we knew that they were going to, you know, give us a portion of money to help us with the wedding. We didn't realize the level of what they were willing to give us to help us with the wedding kind of thing, you know. And so there has been lots of little things like that. And even like, and sometimes big things like that. Even like this conversation that I'm having with you, Like it was really bizarre how we connected. Like I could feel myself watching your stories on Instagram and feeling really like, wow, I feel so connected to everything that Dayna's saying. And then you reached out and you said, hey, like, let's have a conversation. I was like, oof, that was weird. No, that's okay. Because of course, like that's my theme. I'm willing to be pleasantly surprised by life, you know? And it just feels like it's happened time and time again, but you can only be pleasantly surprised by life when you're willing to let go and you're willing to be humbled and trust that there is something that, you know, some things that you're not in control of. And yeah, I just share that because I felt like it was so in line with what you have been saying there.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen to that. I mean, there's no room for surprises when you're trying to be in control. It's like, those are the type of people who are like, I don't like surprises, like not even birthday surprises, because it's like, I'm so tightly in control that anything that comes my way that's beyond what I think is possible for my reality, I'm not even open to it. I'm not even welcome to it, even if it's something so lovely. And that's it. Like, for me, that journey was the recognition of like, oh, even the pain that I've been through or experienced has been provision from God. And if I like really can take the gift in it, I will move forward so much faster because I won't be fighting against him anymore. And then it's like, you start to see the magic of opening yourself up to positive provision, where it's like, oh, like my friend wants me to come up, because like it'd be so easy for you to be like, oh no, I'm busy that weekend, or like, oh no, it's too much of an effort, or like to make up some story, because that's what we do. We self-sabotage and make up these illusory stories of why we can't have what's being provided to us. And we shut out those gifts when we're operating from that place of just like so much restriction and so much control. So I feel you. It's like the greatest journey.
It's so funny you say that because when she offered it, so it was through WhatsApp voice memo, and my husband was in the room when she'd sent the voice memo, and I was like, oh yeah, but you know, if I go away for the weekend, then you're going to have Zali on the weekend, and how are you going to go with that? And is that going to be okay? I don't want to put too much pressure on you. He was like, babe, it's a fuck yes, just go. He's like, maybe you can see if you can arrange the nanny for the morning so that I can have a little sleep in and, you know, be a bit more, because she's at that point in time, she wasn't sleeping through the night still. So it was like, you know, if you can get me that little bit of help. And then of course, like I reached out to our nanny and she's like, yeah, of course I'll come. And so off I went kind of thing. But there was that human moment of like, why do I do this? You know, am I being a bad, you know, wife and mom and blah, 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 blah. And then I just had the best time, you know, and
Totally.
so, yeah, like just allowing myself to receive.
Yeah, that's it. I know I was here the first month in this like fairy forest cabin that I'm in. And it was 2 days before I was supposed to leave. Like my booking was coming to an end and I had planned to go home. And then something happened with my flight and I was like rebooking. And it was like all of the flights were so horrible and like all these weird little things were happening. But I was like, no, like my thing's coming to an end and I'm like supposed to go to Texas and I'm like supposed to do these things. And then I prayed about it. Like I was like, okay, like, haha, Dayna, like you think you're in control here, like go pray. So I went into ceremony and I was like, okay, well, whatever your plan is, God, like I would just love for it to be the most easeful solution. I'll put out the feelers and I'm open to anything, like whatever it is, like that's cool. And the place I'm in is like a holiday booking place. And this is like the busier season. And normally he has bookings on the weekends, but one of the tethers that I put out was maybe I'll extend here another month. And so I put that out as one of the feelers. And literally within like 5 minutes of me messaging him, he messaged me back and was like, oh yeah, like I have no bookings this month. It's so weird. Like I was getting kind of worried and like it was so bizarre. And I was like, because I'm meant to be here. Perfect. Like, thank you. That's easy. That's an easy yes. And that's it. It is always an easy yes, but we just get in our own way. Like it's always an easy yes. Like it's like, oh my gosh, of course I want to go spend the weekend in a luxury villa that's already all paid for with my really good friend. Like, why wouldn't I want to do that? Oh, because what about this? And what about that? And what about this? And it's always like that immediate yes, followed up by like all the reasons we can't, why we're not ready. And that's the work, is like being willing to witness those and then be like, okay, cool. Well, I'm not going to operate from that place, even though it's my unconscious that I think I'm so in control of, that's actually like making 95% of my decisions. Like, I'm going to witness it and see it and like be like, okay, but not this time. I'm going to say the easy yes to what's being lined up for me. Magic.
Have you read The Surrender Experiment?
No, but now I'm going to. Sounds so good.
You should. I read it at the start of this year in January, like when all of this, just be open, just be humble, just know that you're not in control of any of it. When I started to really recognize that, I read this book and oh my goodness, it is amazing. I can't remember the name of the guy who wrote it. Hang on, let me just quickly Google it. But it is exactly what there we go. So The Surrender Experiment by Michael Allen Singer.
Okay,
it's
amazing.
Exactly what we've been talking about. Like, this dude just says yes to everything and to things that are so freaking weird, like that you'd be like, why would you say yes to that kind of thing? And everything in his human body in some of these, and he really opened up about that, which I love. He's like, there are some parts of this where I'm like, every part of me is like, no, that's weird, why would I do that? But then he's like, no, I've been, this has been put in my path for a reason. I said I'd say yes, I said I'd surrender, so let's go surrender. And he literally lent in time and time again to every single thing. Yeah. And I think that's exactly what we're talking about. So I actually think you really love the book, and for whoever's listening, you probably love it too, if you're still hearing this conversation.
Yeah, I'm gonna read it. It reminds me of something. It reminds me of this conversation I had with a friend about like, when you're really in relationship with God, when you really come into union with God, you actually become boundaryless, in the sense that like, you become limitless and full of limitless possibility, but you actually have a lot less need for boundaries as well. And that's like a conversation that, because boundaries is such this big thing, especially when you've been, in narcissistic relationships, which I have as well. You have toxic relationship cycles. And then the conversation is like, you need better boundaries, better boundaries, better boundaries. And what I have seen is when I'm in tune with my discernment, and I'm like actually listening to my discernment and my intuition, my direct tether to the divine, my direct tether to God, and I'm being like really honest with myself about that discernment, there isn't really actually a need for boundaries. It's very like, it's not like this conscious, like, okay, I need a boundary here and a boundary here. And like, I need to like do all of this work to like make sure that I'm in alignment with my boundaries. It's just really like like God's providing this for me. Like, okay, cool. Like, yeah. And like the trust and the faith and the willingness. This has been my experience. I don't want to like speak to anyone else's experience, but I'd be very curious if this resonates with you. Like, even when I reflected on my toxic relationship, it was me trying to control, like I was manipulative in the sense that I was trying to control the other person. It was like, well, if I act this way, if I'm so sweet, if I people please, if I do all of the things for you, then you're going to change. Yes. And then you're going to love me the way that I'm waiting to be loved. And I'm going to fight with you the same way I fight with God for the provision that I'm looking for the love, rather than actually knowing that it already exists. And I just need to stop fighting for trying to get it in the wrong place. And that was the end of my toxic relationship cycles. Like, even my last relationship, like as soon as things became like obvious, like where I was like, oh, red flags. Okay, bye. And because it's usually around like the 3 or 4 month mark that masks start to fall off for people who have narcissistic tendencies. So like things were falling away. But then in the hindsight, when I reflected, I was like looking back way to the beginning of the relationship, and I could see where my discernment had been like, something's wrong. But my ego was like, nah, it's fine. Like, I can justify that this way, or like, nah, it's fine. It's like, well, if my discernment had already been that finely tuned, I wouldn't have even needed that lesson, and it wouldn't have come in the first place.
Yes. I love this conversation. I was literally just Sunday. I was at the park with my girlfriend, and you know, our kids and that sort of thing. And she's very spiritual, and we were having this very same conversation. Like, she goes to me, do you think there's a difference between standards and boundaries? And I was like, no, I think that your boundaries lay within your standards. Your standards lay within your discernment of who you decide that you are in that moment in time. And you know, I know certainly when I've been in those codependent narcissistic situations, it's because in that moment in time, I saw myself as somebody who, you know, exactly as you're saying, I was quite manipulative. I was like, how do I get this to work my way? How do I have control over this? How do I make it so that you love me, so that you see me, because I'm so good, and I know I'd be so good for you, and all of this sort of thing. And, you know, even to the point as well where I was like, I can see that you've got some good human in you. And so I'm going to try and bring that good human in you. Like, that's how much the control was trying to, you know, I was trying to pull it out kind of thing. And I was like, I look back on it now, and, you know, again, like, hindsight, a wonderful thing. And I look back on it, I'm like, oh, there was just so much energy poured into that, into me trying to prove myself, into me trying to pull out the good person in him, which I do believe is in there within those people. I do believe that there is good in those people, and they're just so hurt that they don't know how to respond to the world in any other way. I really just, I look at anybody who has been in that sort of situation in my life, and, you know, played out that part in my life, and I just send them love, because I'm like, you know what, like, I know that you're a good person in there somewhere. You just want love just like I do. You know, you just want to feel fulfilled in everything that I do, but you're going a different way about it, and that's it. That's all it is. There's no judgment. There's no, and so coming from that space, like, just really, it lets go of control, lets go of anything. And I agree, there is no boundaries. There's no sense of like, oh, I have to put my boundary up and I have to, rah, rah. It's just like, well, who do I want to be in this world? Like, what is it? What presence do I want to bring into this world? How can I bring such beauty into this world by just being me, being connected to God, you know, working through God, being of service? Like, how can I be all of those things? You know, there's that real sense of like, when I can come from that real heart space, then I can have love for those people who hurt me very, very deeply, you know, and just see them as being humans, having this human experience, you know, just doing life the best way that they know how. You know, I can really connect.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. And I think I really agree with you. And I think it's like an unpopular opinion around narcissism. And I would love to do a whole other podcast episode on this, because we both have a very similar opinion, which is like, I also agree, like, narcissists get the bad rap because they're, you know, they're manipulative in a non-people pleasy, nice girl, like overly kind way. They're manipulative in a different way that it's easy to label them as the perpetrator. And like, most of what I see on the internet around narcissism is, it's like, they're the perpetrator, the other person is the victim, no personal accountability. Narcissists are just horrible people. They will never change. They have a personality disorder that is unchangeable. They're all of these things. And I've been in like the type of toxic relationship where someone used to hold a gun to my head and tell me he was going to blow my brains out if I ever left him. So like, I've been in the pits of a toxic relationship. Like, I understand that, like, in those moments, like, something horrible is happening to you. And there's also that personal accountability piece of like, when you are in true alignment with your discernment and you're not trying to get something from somebody, you don't end up in those situations. And that's like a really unpopular thing to say. And I understand that that is going to trigger some people who listen to this episode, and I am okay with that, because I will lay on the sword for that belief. Like, because for me, that belief has served me in the sense that when I'm in my victimhood, I recognize that I am not in my power. I am not sovereign in my life. And so any area of my life where I have ever felt like, or bought into the story that I am a victim, whether it was with my rapist, whether it was with my narcissistic ex who used to hold a gun to my head, whether it was with my toxic boss who used to like pit employees against each other and make up stories so that people would have fights in the kitchen, like all of these like crazy scenarios that I've been in, I have decided to reclaim my power from them. And in the reclamation of my power from them, I've come to the very the truth that most people, which in my opinion is the biggest problem in society today, like if this went away, like so many of the world's problems would be solved. Like we would live in a completely different reality, which is I'm not a victim to any of those people. Yeah, those situations fucking sucked and they're not okay. And like what happened to me is really shitty. And there's things that are happening to other people that are really shitty. And I also recognize that like in the labeling of narcissists as perpetrators, as people who will never change, are they ever going to change? Are those people ever actually going to rediscover themselves again? Are they ever going to heal that horrible wound that has them acting that out of integrity with their soul? No. Like we're perpetuating the problem by labeling them that way and by not taking personal accountability for our role in those dynamics. And that's a tough one, but it is a necessary one. Like if things are really going to change for good, that's something I've been thinking about speaking on more. And I'm like, oh, that's a hard one, but like, yeah, like we've got to have that conversation.
I think I actually would love to do another podcast on that conversation because I have so much to say about it. But I think as you were talking, one of the things that comes up for me is like, I know when I was in that situation. So I never kind of had any physical abuse. Like there's a scale of like narcissism. I can't think of the name of the guy right now, but anyway, I'll share it when we do, if you want to do another episode separately on this. There's a whole scale that talks about like the different levels of narcissism and codependence, you know, so
we talked about it in Bali. I have like a vivid memory of sitting in Christina's living room, like having that conversation with you and Caleb.
And so like when I think about it, I'm like, the type of narcissistic relationship I was in wasn't physically abusive, which made it really hard for me to see because there was no wounds. There was no like, I have a bruise here or I've had a gun to my head or anything like that for me to go, yep, this is actually wrong. You know, so I sat in that relationship for 10 years, like, you know, on and off, wondering whether I was going crazy or whether there was something in that. Like I didn't know. But I kind of feel like I agree with you wholeheartedly in terms of like we need to own our part in it. We need to own the parts where we did manipulate to try and get what we wanted, when we tried to change somebody else, when we tried to control and all of those things. And also at that point in time, I wasn't ready to hear that. Like I almost needed to label him the narcissist to normalize what had happened to me to get myself out of it. So whilst I agree with you wholeheartedly, and that is my end conclusion in terms of like, you know, I do agree with, like, I'm right with you there. I also think for listening to this and who are still stuck in it or just getting out of it, they kind of do need that to just like get their head around what had happened to them and somehow just be like, oh, okay, I'm not alone. Like, you know, there is something like this.
Yes.
But it's not a helpful story either. Like one of the things I found when I was doing my healing around in these groups of narcissistic, you know, kind of bashing groups is like, yeah, you get to normalize your story or whatever, but it also can be more toxic than the actual relationship itself because you end up going around, oh yeah, I experienced this and yeah, that's definitely a narcissist and what an asshole, la la la, and it's just not helpful. Like you said, you know,
it's not
labeling them actually help you or them, you know, because all you do is stay in the cycle and you don't get to separate yourself from it and heal from it. And all it does is perpetuates their behavior. So
yes,
that's my
100%. Oh yeah. And I completely agree with you. Like I wasn't ready to hear that either. Like it was definitely the reason I wasn't ready to hear it. And I think that this is like the conversation that I want to have is like, instead of going headfirst into all the information that you can find about what is a narcissist and what are all the different types of narcissistic abuse, because I've also experienced really covert narcissism. Like my last relationship, the red flags weren't physical. They were all very like subtle incongruencies between who he said he was and the truth that was coming to the surface. And then the mask falling away when I would confront him and like all these different things happening. And I had never experienced it in that capacity. And so it took me a moment to be like, wait, like what's happening here? And then I started to slip, like I started to become someone who I wasn't, where I was like all of a sudden going through his phone and like wanting to like spy on him and like all these things. And I found evidence to support what I already knew to be true. I found the pictures and I found the phone calls and I found like, but I already knew it to be true. And if I had chosen at the moment that I knew it to be true, to be in integrity with myself, I would have left 6 weeks sooner than I did, but I didn't. And the part that's hard is the willingness to recognize that just as much as someone else that you're in a relationship dynamic with is narcissistic, you are codependent, and that is equally as manipulative and equally as toxic and equally as unhealthy. And that willingness to own that and be like, yeah, I actually need to focus on myself and healing my own codependent patterns instead of focusing on the narcissist and all of the reasons that they're a horrible person.
Yeah. And that's a huge one. I find this so much when it comes to that, is like, I'm going to leave that relationship because he's a narcissist and I'm just going to go and find love over here. And it's like, no, like your whole thing around being in this space is that you're afraid to be abandoned. You're afraid not to be loved. You very moment in time, you need to spend some time with yourself. Like you need to like love yourself and heal those parts of yourself and and I was actually like, a girlfriend of mine was going through this last year. I was saying to her, like, don't go date, because she's like, oh, why am I attracting all of these fuckboys and all these emotionally unavailable men and all the rest of it? I'm like, because you're not meant to be doing anything with them. You know, you're not meant to be going and having a bang and a get out kind of thing and then feeling like shit about it. You're meant to be hanging out with you, falling so deeply in love with you, like going and having adventures with you. And sitting in, and I remember doing this myself, sitting in a restaurant and awkwardly just like being alone in a restaurant with people looking at you, being like, is there anybody else coming to the table with you? No, there's not. I am my best date, you know, and really loving yourself that deeply, that then like that codependency stuff, like when you do go into another relationship, you're willing to go in as a whole person, not just like, you know, I can't stand that saying of like, I'm seeking my other half. No, like, I am whole, they are whole, and we're coming together. Like that's what I believe. Yeah. But I feel like this is verging on our next podcast, so I'm going to stop now.
Yes. Yes, I agree. Like I was just going to say the same thing. We're feeling that same vibe. Like we could talk for hours, I'm sure.
Yes.
So we'll definitely have to schedule in another episode. But this was so wonderful. Like I'm so grateful. Thank you for having this conversation with me.
Oh, thank you. I've really enjoyed it. And it's exactly what I thought. And you know, it's so funny. I think when we originally scheduled this, if it had happened then, to be honest with you, I think I was like in one of those peel back moments, and I don't think it would have been as good as what today's has been. So all of that happened exactly how it was meant to.
Yes, I totally agree. And I felt the same, like God was in control of that one, like just surrendered. I knew we would come together and talk, and I'm so glad that we did. And it was perfectly lined up and synchronistic for both of us.
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your time. And yeah, so do we park it here or?
Yeah. Perfect.